I'm really delighted to welcome you here today to London's Living Room. My name is Jo Baxendale. I'm Senior Policy Officer for Visual Art here at City Hall. And it was almost 2 years ago, exactly, that Leo Villareal and architects Lifshitz, Davidson and Sandilands' poetic collaboration in light won the Illuminated River competition. I'm pleased to say that the Mayor's Office was an early supporter of Illuminated River, and at the time, Mayor Sadiq Khan said, "The Illuminated River will act as a catalyst to improve lighting conditions, cultivate new opportunities for the use of riverscape, and define the bridges as renewed civic space for Londoners." Once you've listened to Leo talk about the work today, I'm sure you will agree those ambitions will be thoroughly exceeded, and it is no exaggeration to say that Illuminated River is going to change the face of London. After Leo's talk, he will be joined by Kieran Edwards from Iceni Projects, Roxana Jahangir from Illuminated River Foundation for a Q&A. But before I finally hand over to Leo, I just wanted to say that the talk today is going to be filmed for a Channel 4 documentary, but it's not live, so please do make yourself aware to the crew at the back of the room. There's Bella, if you would like not to be filmed, and they will make a note of that. But otherwise, please turn off your phones and join me in welcoming Leo.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I want to thank Mayor Sadiq Khan and the GLA team for hosting this event and giving me a chance to talk about the project. I'll speak briefly about my background and where I've come from. I got my start way back when I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Chihuahua. My father's from Mexico. My mom is from West Texas. I studied art at Yale. I was an undergraduate and studied sculpture, and very quickly became inspired by artists like James Turrell and Dan Flavin, which you can see here, who are working with light, Flavin with minimal fluorescent tubes, Turrell with different uses of light and sky spaces. My mother's family is actually from West Texas, from a small town called Marfa, which has become a big art center, and it's where the artist Donald Judd went in the 70s and converted this West Texas town of 2,000 people into his studio and museum and a center for experimentation. These are some photographs from Marfa. So there are these minimal pieces using stainless steel, aluminum, and concrete. The other kind of formative moment for me, I graduated in 1990 and got very interested in technology at that point. But these are very early days. And I was interested in Photoshop, which had just come out, and things like virtual reality the first time around. But you had to be in an academic environment to have access to this equipment. So I ended up going to NYU to the Interactive Telecommunications program, which is sort of a media lab type place, and immersing myself in technology. At that point, the only job you could get was making CD-ROMs. There was no web. It was just a very different time. And after I finished there in 1994, I ended up going to work at a research lab in Palo Alto. So I went out to Silicon Valley and started working at a lab that Paul Allen had started called Interval Research, and worked with Michael Neymark, an amazing guy who had been at MIT, and he had created the stereoscopic camera rig and had driven it around Banff, Canada on all these paths. So we were taking the stereoscopic data and dimensionalizing it. So taking stereoscopic pairs, but then creating 3D models from this. Today, this is very commonplace, but 20 years ago, this was a very exciting thing to be doing. So it was my first exposure to data and breaking things down and looking at them in an abstract way. And from certain perspectives, they're coherent, and from others, they're abstract. The other transformative thing that happened to me in 1994 was my first visit to Burning Man, which is a festival that happens in the desert of Nevada. In the Black Rock Desert, this is an image of the landscape. There's nothing growing for hundreds of square miles, and people gather and build a city together. This is the parched earth, no plants. These days, it's up to 70,000 people, and this is what an aerial view of Burning Man looks like today. When I first went there in 1994, there was maybe 1,000 people in this very empty landscape. And my first experience at Burning Man was getting profoundly lost. I mean, finding your way around at night in this place with no roads and no beacons at all was quite challenging. So by my third year out there, I decided to do something about it and created I wouldn't call it a sculpture at that point. It was a utilitarian device using 16 strobe lights and a microcontroller. So 0 was off and 1 is on, and I started building up these sequences to create these distinct patterns so I could mark my way home. But out of this, I sort of had this epiphany of combining software and light and space and realized I was really onto something. So this really changed my work at that point. I took it back to New York and put it on the wall of my studio and realized this was a very exciting form. So I established my studio in 1998 in New York, and by 2003 I started doing public artworks. This is at MoMA PS1. On the side of the building, there was a construction project happening, and I was asked by Klaus Biesenbach and Alana Heiss to think about the building and what could we do to activate it. So I created a matrix of 640 LED lights, sequenced, and it was all the patterning was inspired by the kinetic activity around the site. This is up at the Albright Knox in Buffalo, New York. This is a Gordon Bunchap building from 1962, and I really respect the building and wanted to do something that didn't just use it as a pedestal, but was deeply integrated into it, but using a different type of language. This is at the Nerman Museum in Kansas City, an architect named Kyu Sung Woo, who again generously offered this part of the building to activate. So I've had lots of very successful collaborations with architects, and for me, it's all about working together, and it's about creating something that invigorates without overwhelming. So this is the Brooklyn Academy of Music. I was asked to do something with the facade of this Beaux-Arts building. This started out as a temporary project. It was supposed to be up for about 3 months, and at the end of the 3 months, they decided to keep the piece, and it's been there now, I think almost 8 years, so it's become a permanent part of the Brooklyn Academy of Music. This is at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. I.M. Pei designed this tunnel that links the east and west buildings, and it was somewhat dark and unresolved, and so I proposed installing 41,000 white LED lights in the gaps between these slats. Already people are on this journey with these people movers, but through this, it added an additional layer in being immersed in light. All my work is abstract. I don't use any images, and I don't use any text, so I'm interested in rules and underlying structures. Interested in mathematicians like John Conway, who developed this game of life, which is a very simple set of rules, but from that simplicity come these very complex patterns that you would swear are something you're seeing under a microscope or in the cosmos. This is an installation at the Bleecker Street subway station and the first piece of digital art that the MTA in New York City has commissioned. And this has been up since 2012. And quite exciting to work with the transportation network and truly bringing art to the people and bringing art out of the museum and galleries and to where people are. This is Buckyball, which was presented in Madison Square Park. Very interested in geometry and boiling things down to the minimum and starting to build things up. So these I deal with spatial resolution. It's this form, but then I'm moving light around on that form. So there's a sense of activation. And the buckyball is something that, it's a carbon-60 molecule, something you would never be able to see with the naked eye. But we presented it in a park that was filled with equestrian statues and things, and taking this thing that you couldn't see and blowing it up to this monumental level was something exciting to do. This is a piece called Cylinder. It's actually shown here in London at the Hayward Gallery in the Light Show a few years ago, and that show went on to tour to 5 different venues internationally. But it was very exciting to be in London and to show my work in the context of contemporary artists using light. And this is a proposal for San Francisco, the new convention center that's being built, and that should be going in the next few months. So I'll jump to this is another more recent project. This is a David Chipperfield building in Seoul, a company called Amore Pacific, and I worked with them to do a commission to again activate a part of the building. So this is a matrix of white LED lights, and all the patterning is, it's very organic. The other thing I should say is that I don't know in advance what the patterns are going to be, so I'm trying to make discoveries. So there's an element of chance and improvisation as I'm doing these pieces. So when I see something compelling, I capture those moments, and those become the building blocks for the compositions that I create. And then, in the end, those compositions and those building blocks are presented in a random order and for a random amount of time. So it's not a loop. It's something that is, you can look at it and see something different in it every time. And because it's abstract, it's open-ended, and the pieces preserve a sense of mystery. So you don't feel like you've seen this and you can, move on to the next thing. This is a project called the Bay Lights. I was asked to think about the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, and as a canvas, and what would I do? I spent several months creating this animation that you see here. This is a simulation of the project, and I proposed putting 25,000 white LED lights on the suspender cables of the bridge. And we started showing it to Caltrans. They own and operate all the bridges and roads in California. And they got very excited about this proposal, because you can say, we want to put lights on the bridge, and that means something different to everyone, each person. But to actually show people what it could look like was very powerful. And we thought, well, maybe we can get a permit to do this. So they were very helpful. We formed a team to explore the possibilities. And then Caltrans took me up to the Bay Bridge. It's one thing to do these things in Photoshop and in 3D, but it's a whole other thing to actually go out there and experience this bridge. The Bay Bridge is this span of it is 1.8 miles long. The towers are 525 feet tall, and there's no access whatsoever. In order to put anything on there, we had to do lane closures from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. and had it would involve contractors hanging in baskets on the bridge, hanging this very fragile piece of electronics. Against all odds, we found people willing to do this. Everyone was very supportive of the effort. No one said no. We were able to form a team to do the technical design of it. For me, the most inspiring thing was just being up in this location and seeing the interaction of the light and the water and the rippling of the atmosphere and all these things. And I kept thinking, if I can only translate what I'm seeing to my programmer, because I want to recreate some of the beauty and the interactions that I'm seeing. Although my work is not representational, it does take inspiration from the site. So the movement of traffic, the movement of water, any kind of kinetic activity is inspiration that I take to then apply to the final sequences. So we went through a long process with Philips as our lighting partner, went through many iterations of how to mount these things, and it turns out we were going to zip tie them to the suspender cables, which we did, and that's how they're held up there. And finally, after 2.5 years from initial idea to completion, I got to do what I do, which is program, and I got to sit in front of the bridges for months with my laptop connected live to the bridge. And when people realized I was controlling the bridge, there was much excitement, and people, suddenly have 30 people around me, and everyone said they couldn't believe it. But it was really something that I needed to do on site. It's not something I could do in my studio in New York and then send off to San Francisco. It was something that required tuning and adjustment and great sensitivity. So I sat there on the edges of the Embarcadero night after night in all sorts of weather and testing, and it was also something I had to feel comfortable revealing all the process, because everyone could see all the glitches and the errors and all these things, but that just became part of it. So finally, after all of that, we were able to premiere the piece in 2013 to much excitement. One thing I should say about the Bay Bridge is it's always been overshadowed by the Golden Gate, which is the iconic bridge of San Francisco. But this really was transformational in that it activated the bridge and changed the way people saw the bridge through a very kind of subtle means. So it highlighted it, but it also was something very much, very public and very much available to everyone. So we estimated tens of millions of people have experienced the Bay Lights. It was something that required thousands of people to achieve, but everyone who worked on it had a sense of ownership, like they all helped to do this, and we did it in a communal way. So there was incredible pride in what we had done. And the contractors that hung the lights there in the middle of the night were really thrilled to be able to bring their families and their kids there to see the work that they had done, and they were incredibly proud. But what I've observed with the Bay Lights is that when you see it, you can't help but feel a connection to the person next to you. And even if you don't know them, people are talking about it, and it's connecting. And I've described these artworks sometimes as digital campfires. So it has this ability to bring people together and to create community, which a lot of people talk about. To actually see that in action is quite remarkable. And you don't need to know anything about programming or the history of art or abstraction to be able to appreciate these works. Those layers are in there for people who are interested in those things, but anyone can look at it. And art has such and light has such a powerful ability to connect people that it's very remarkable to see the way that it has changed the city. So this piece was up for 2 years, and then it came down, and there was an uproar. People said this has to come back. They had fallen in love with this artwork, and so we were able to install it again and gift it to the state of California, and now it's become permanent and part of the landscape. So it's a very exciting story of how monumental art can be transformational, and something that, I feel very grateful that artists like Christo wrote us letters of support and saw the value of artworks like this for the city, and that everyone was able to get behind it, from people who loved art, but also to the politicians who realized that this was economically beneficial for the city. So there are many very positive things that happen through the Bay Lights. Which brings me to the Illuminated River, an amazing, very exciting competition that we participated in. Over 100 teams did proposals for it, and we got shortlisted. And just it's going to be 2 years, and I think next week, that we were selected to do this project. And it's certainly, the Bay Lights is one thing. It's 1.8 miles long. It's quite large, but this is a whole other challenge in that we're dealing with 15 separate bridges and separate structures in a very historic city, and with really these icons. So it's been something that's been very humbling for me, and but very exciting as well, because there's so much beauty here in London, and it's been thrilling to be here. I think I've been here maybe 20 times in the last 2 years, and every time I come, I go out and take a very long walk on the edge of the river, walking up and down, observing, seeing how people interact with the river and its bridges, and think about how could we, understanding it and really listening. And that's the key thing, is that hearing about the bridges, and everyone wants to tell you a story of their experience with it. So I've met, the boatmen. I've been on many tours. I've met the rescue workers who fish people out if you fall into the Thames. I've met many architects, the original project architects of the bridges, and engineers, just on and on. But it's been about listening and synthesizing these things and trying to understand what we could do to contribute to what is here. My inspiration has really come from a lot of the artists that have responded to the Thames and its bridges, from Monet to Turner to Whistler. And these bridges are amazing in their atmosphere, and they, for hundreds of years, the Thames has been inspiring artists. Handel's Water Music, which just had its 300th anniversary, which was composed to be performed on the Thames on a barge. I mean, it's just an amazing and rich thing to think about. So I'll show you the simulations that we have for the first 4 bridges. We're doing 15 bridges from Tower Bridge to Albert Bridge. The initial inspiration came from what is existing, and I looked at London Bridge and noted the color light that's raking down the side of the bridge. That's a single color, and thought this was an opportunity to do something that we could replace the existing lights with more energy efficient and durable LED lights, but then add the ability to work with color. Certain bridges are monochromatic in this scheme, and other ones use color. And what you're seeing here are just placeholders. These are very small examples of what it will be, and I'm going to be here in London for weeks and months, sitting on the banks of the river, tuning and adjusting to make sure that this artwork is appropriate in its tempo and its brightness, and it's done with great sensitivity. So that the intention is to augment what's there and create something that allows people to see the beauty. Cannon Street Rail Bridge is a very utilitarian structure, very sturdy, but it really disappears in the night. And I think there's an opportunity to activate it with this line of light. And I think it will create each bridge is sequenced and programmed as its own thing, but then there's an overall orchestration of all of the bridges, so there's a connection between them. So we're seeing it, even though there's a lot of diversity in terms of the architectural styles of the bridges and their architecture and engineering, there is this overall idea that links them together. So that's something that we're exploring and trying to create this sense of connection along the river. So this is a very simple line of light, and there'll be the next bridge over, Southwark, already has some lighting on it that was left over from the Olympics. So some bridges don't have any lighting, and we've been looking at it and thinking that some of the things that were done for the Olympics were done in a hurry, and they have not stood the test of time. Some of them are not working. There's some things that need attention, and I think what we're trying to do is to come up with a scheme that is very durable and engineered very well so that it can stand the test of time and bring the bridges to life. There is a very subtle sequencing to the light. The light is changing and moving, and that sequencing is again inspired by the river itself. I mean, it's just amazing that the Thames rises and falls 5 meters twice a day. And I see it as this living thing that we're trying to take inspiration from that and channel that into what we're doing with the sequencing. But again, in a way that is respectful of the structures that are there and trying to highlight what's existing. This is Millennium Bridge, and we've been working very closely with Foster's and with Andy Bowe, who was the original project architect. Trying to understand Norman Foster's, he had this idea to create a blade of light over the Thames, inspired by Flash Gordon, so kind of an amazing pop cultural reference. But somehow through the process of creating the bridge, the light never was exactly what Foster's and Partners had intended. So we've been able to go back and talk to them about what they wanted and how can we make it right. So it's been very exciting. We've done many mock-ups with them and speaking closely to understand their intentions and to achieve something together. So they're very excited about our process so far. We've also been working with Alex Leifschitz, who's our team architect for this entire project, and he did the Golden Jubilee bridges, and we've been working very closely with him on his bridge. So when we have the ability to talk to the original project architects, it's amazing, because then we can do something that's integrated. In other cases, we're looking at historic photographs, trying to understand how was light used on this bridge originally, because we don't want to add anything that's extra. We're trying to augment, but in a very careful way. So this is the visualization that we've done, and this shows this is showing this is a 3D rendering, so this is not a photograph, but this is showing it without the bridges illuminated. And I'll show you the next simulation. This shows the bridges themselves, and this has been very useful for us to understand the relationship between the various bridges, because there are these connections. Certainly with Albert and Chelsea, there are suspension bridges that already have marquee lighting on them. Again, we want to replace that with more durable and energy efficient LED lighting. With Vauxhall, Lambeth, and Westminster, those almost become like a triptych in that they're painted bridges, the green of Westminster, the kind of a reddish hue of Lambeth, and the Vauxhall is kind of an amazing explosion of yellow and red and blue and with sculptures, and it's quite ornate. But exciting to think about how those structures can be augmented. There are other bridges like the Golden Jubilee Bridge, a Millennium Tower, which use white light and these lines of white light, so it's very minimal and pared down. And others like London and Waterloo, which have used more saturation because of their location in the city, and it feels like more appropriate with South Bank Center to be able to do something with color. So finally, I'll show you all of it blended together. Our hope is to use the minimum amount of light necessary to achieve something that, that makes the bridges legible, because now a lot of them disappear into the night. And it's something like as iconic as Westminster Bridge, you really don't even see, which I think it should be seen because it's so beautiful and there's so much heritage. And I think that bringing things into balance with some of the other surrounding structures and creating some examples of sensitive lighting is important, But I'm approaching this, not as a lighting designer. I'm approaching it as an artist. And I think what distinguishes it is the care with which the programming is done and the customization. And we're creating custom tools specifically for this project that we're using in order to achieve our goals. I think, for me, my hope is that, bridges are very powerful structures to connect people. And there's such an amazing opportunity to do something here in London and to really change the way people see and hopefully bring people together and create this activation of the nighttime, the use of the city, which is changing a lot. And I think that, it's all about generosity. I mean, this is really done in the spirit of a gift to the city and a gift to everyone in London and everyone who comes here. So it's something that I think is a gesture that hopefully, I think it will be transformational. It's a fairly simple idea in its use of light, but I do think that it will change the way people see and people will see see the beauty that surrounds them through a very, through this gesture. So, thank you very much.